5 bikers suddenly roared down Maplewood's quiet main street. They circled Walter Thompson, a 91-year-old war veteran, taunting him with crude jokes and laughter. Out of nowhere, Elon Musk appeared, and what happened next saw that those bikers never forgot the day they messed with the wrong man. The town of Maplewood was the kind of place where secrets were rare, and every face was a familiar one. Walter Thompson had called it home for over 6 decades. At 91, he was a man of quiet routines. Every evening at exactly 6:15, he strolled from his modest old-fashioned house to Rosie's diner, a beloved local spot where the coffee tasted amazing and was a chill place for both young and adults. As Walter walked down Main Street with his cane tapping lightly against the pavement, he tipped his flat cap at passers-by and chuckled when little Danny from across the street tried to race his skateboard against him. "Careful there, champ," Walter called, his voice warm and steady. But the peace of Maplewood was soon disturbed when these bikers arrived. They rolled into town like a thunderstorm, the sound of their engines echoing off the storefronts. The leader, Frank, was a big, strong man with a messy beard and a mean look on his face all the time. 4 other bikers followed. Their leather jackets shone brightly under the weak light of the streetlights. The townsfolk, startled, froze in their tracks, their eyes flicking nervously toward the commotion. Walter had just passed by the corner near the general store when the bikers spotted him. Frank revved his engine and grinned. Well, he spoke slowly. "Look who's out past his bedtime." Walter paused, his sharp blue eyes meeting Frank's without a flicker of fear. Perhaps due to his long years of war, there were only a few things that could scare Walter. "Evening," he replied, shifting his weight onto his cane. That only seemed to amuse them. The gang surrounded him, with their bikes still running and making noise. "Where are you headed, Gramps?" one of them jeered, leaning forward with a mocking grin. Walter's voice remained steady. "Rosie's diner, same place I go every night." Frank snorted and swung a leg off his bike. He leaned towards Walter's direction, looking him up and down like he was inspecting an antique. "Let's see what you're packing," he said, patting Walter's coat pockets roughly. The search turned up nothing but an old handkerchief and a tin of mints. Frank tossed them onto the ground with a laugh. "Figures," he said. "Come on, boys. Let's see what the old man eats for dinner." Walter bent to retrieve his belongings, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but anger. He straightened slowly, his back stiff, and met Frank's gaze. "You're making a mistake, son." The gang erupted in laughter, their cruel humor ringing down the street. They followed Walter as he walked to the diner, their voices loud and grating. Inside Rosie's, the warm glow of neon lights usually gave the place a cozy feel, but that night it felt oppressive. The moment Walter stepped in with the bikers on his heels, the hum of conversation died. Rosie, the diner's owner and a fierce protector of her customers, gave the gang a ridiculous glare. "Evening, Rosie," Walter greeted her, his voice calm as ever. Rosie forced a smile. "Evening, Walter. Coffee's fresh. Do you want the usual?" Before Walter could answer, Frank cut in. "We'll take whatever he's having," he said, smirking as he slid onto a stool at the counter. The other bikers spread out, their presence turning the diner's usually welcoming atmosphere into something tense. Walter sat at his usual table, with his hands folded. The gang's antics grew louder as they grabbed menus and argued over what to order. Frank went over to Walter's table and plucked a fry off his plate. "You don't mind, do you, Gramps?" he asked, chewing with his mouth open and laughing hysterically. Walter said nothing. Rosie, clearly fuming, moved toward the phone, but Frank held up a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said. The other patrons, mostly locals who adored Walter, watched in horrified silence. Bob, the retired mailman, clenched his fists under the table, but his wife gripped his arm. "Don't," she whispered. Frank's gang seemed to make merry in the unease they'd created. They knocked over a salt shaker, spilled a glass of water, and made crude jokes. One of them even climbed onto the counter, but quickly got a sharp stare from Rosie. Walter finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You've had your fun. Now it's time to leave." Frank leaned in close, his breath reeking of beer. "Or what, old man?" Walter didn't answer. He simply stared back at Frank with a look that frightened even the bikers. For a moment, the diner was so silent you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back. Then Frank laughed, loud and cruel, and threw Walter's sandwich on the floor. "That's what I thought," he sneered. Rosie's eyes flashed with fury, but Walter placed a hand on her arm. "It's all right," he said softly, but it wasn't all right. Not for the people who watched helplessly, and certainly not for Walter, whose quiet dignity had been trampled. Outside, the bikers' motorcycles shone brightly in the moonlight, and their laughter could be heard down the empty streets. Unknown to them, fate, or perhaps justice, was already headed their way. The atmosphere outside Rosie's diner felt tense, almost as if the air carried the weight of what had just happened. Walter was now outside, sitting in his usual booth beside the diner, his hands gripping the table for support. One would have thought the bikers would have been tired by now, but they kept up their loud and obnoxious behavior, their laughter cutting through the street silence. Behind the counter, Rosie tried to focus on cleaning, but her eyes kept drifting toward Walter through the window. She hated feeling so powerless, but knew stirring up trouble with the gang could make things worse. And then, a fancy Tesla drove down the main street, making a loud noise. Elon Musk, en route to visit his friend Sam at a nearby ranch, glanced out the panoramic windows of his Tesla car. His sharp eyes caught sight of the diner. He could feel the tension in the air from the distressed expressions of the people and the unruly gang causing commotion. He became curious. "What's going on there?" he murmured to himself. He wasn't the type to ignore something that felt wrong. With a soft hum, his car came to a halt just outside the diner. The door of the Tesla opened and Elon stepped out, adjusting his casual jacket against the cool breeze. The bikers seemed oblivious to the arrival of their unexpected visitor. Frank, their leader, was leaning over Walter's booth, making exaggerated gestures as he continued his taunts. "You sure don't talk much, old man. Cat got your tongue?" Walter's calm reply was, however, more bold and courageous this time. "I've seen worse than you, son. You're not half as scary as you think you are," Walter said. Elon's presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. Conversations paused, heads turned, and even Frank, who had seen Elon, became quite composed. Recognizing the billionaire, the gang exchanged quick glances, their smirks faltering before they showed their surprise. "Well, look who it is," Frank said, spreading his arms in a mockery welcome. "Mr. Moneybags himself. Are you here to save the day, rich boy?" Elon didn't react to the taunt. He glanced at everyone he could see, from the bikers, the uneasy customers, to Walter's composed but weary expression. "What's going on here?" Elon asked, his tone calm but firm. "None of your business," Frank replied, his grin widening. "Unless you're looking for trouble too." Elon didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and tapped rapidly, his expression unreadable. The bikers exchanged puzzled looks. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Frank shouted, stepping closer to Elon. Without looking up, Elon said coolly, "I'm listening. Keep going." Frank became angry at the dismissive tone, but before he could react, the distant sound of sirens began to creep into their ears. The bikers froze, their confidence fading as the sound of approaching police sirens grew louder. "What the hell is this?" one of the bikers muttered, stretching his neck upwards so to see the road more clearly. Elon finally looked up, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Turns out your little joyride isn't as innocent as you think," he said. His voice carried a quiet authority that made even Frank hesitate. As the first police car screeched to a halt outside, Frank's confidence diminished. "You called the cops on us?" he spat, glaring at Elon. "Actually," Elon said with a faint smirk, "I called a few people. Let's just say they weren't too happy to hear about you harassing a 91-year-old veteran. The whole diner environment erupted into movement as officers entered, their stern expressions leaving no room for negotiation. "Frank Carter and Associates," one of them announced, holding up a clipboard. "We've got warrants for your arrest." "What for?" Frank demanded, his voice rising. "Assault, theft, destruction of property. Oh, and it looks like there are a few outstanding warrants from other towns too," the officer replied. "You've been busy." The gang's attempts to protest were drowned out by the clink of handcuffs and the murmurs of the diner's patrons. As the officers escorted the bikers out, the tension in the room lifted like a fog clearing after a storm. Walter leaned back in his booth, his expression one of quiet relief. He looked over at Elon, who had returned to his calm, observational stance near the counter. "Thank you," Walter said simply. Elon nodded. It was the right thing to do. Rosie came out from behind the counter, her usual fiery demeanor returning. "That's an understatement," she said, crossing her arms. "I don't know what we'd have done if you hadn't stepped in." Elon smiled faintly, happy to help. He turned to Walter. "Are you all right?" "I've seen worse," Walter replied with a small shrug, though the gratitude in his eyes was unmistakable. As the sirens faded into the distance, the diner's patrons began to clap. It started with a single pair of hands, but quickly spread, filling the small space with an overwhelming sense of relief and unity. Elon waved it off with a modest grin. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I've still got a few things to take care of." With that, he pulled out his phone again, his fingers flying over the screen. The man who had disrupted industries and launched rockets was about to turn his attention to ensuring the bikers wouldn't be troubling anyone ever again. The following morning, Maplewood woke to an unusual buzz of activity. News of the diner incident had spread like wildfire. By noon, the townsfolk gathered in small groups at the local coffee shop, the park benches, and even outside the general store, recounting the dramatic showdown. Rosie, always quick to set the record straight, had shared every detail, her nearly exaggerated recounts turning Elon into an almost mythical figure in their quiet town. At his ranch-style home on the outskirts of town, Walter sat on his front porch with a cup of black coffee, his cane resting against the arm of his chair. The previous night's events were still vivid in his mind, though he wasn't one to dwell. "Life moves forward," he often said. But little did Walter know, life in Maplewood was about to take an even more unexpected turn. A loud hoot broke the morning silence as Elon's Tesla pulled up into Walter's driveway. Stepping out, Elon carried a paper bag in one hand and his ever-present phone in the other. "Morning, Walter," he greeted with a small smile, setting the bag on the porch railing. Walter raised a brow. "Morning, Elon. What brings you all the way out here?" "Breakfast," Elon replied, gesturing toward the bag. "Rosie thought you could use a warm meal, courtesy of her kitchen." Walter chuckled softly, his blue eyes twinkling. "That woman's got a heart of gold." Elon nodded, sitting down on the porch step. "She does, but I'm here for more than breakfast," he said, leaning forward. "I've been thinking about what happened last night. It shouldn't have gotten that far." Walter tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "You've spent your life serving this town," Elon said, his tone thoughtful. "It's about time the town did more to serve you." True to his word, Elon set to work. The first call he made was to his legal team, ensuring every piece of evidence against Frank and his gang was airtight. The bikers were facing more than just the fallout from the diner incident. Elon's background checks had uncovered a laundry list of crimes across state lines. By the following week, the gang stood before a judge, their smirks replaced with hollow stares as they received their sentences: years behind bars, hefty fines, and a lifetime ban from Maplewood. The media latched onto the story, thanks in part to Elon's subtle nudge. News outlets painted the bikers as villains, with headlines like "Veteran harassed by biker gang," "Justice served with a side of Elon Musk. Social media exploded with support for Walter, and the gang found themselves the target of national outrage. Their once feared reputation was now in tatters. Even their biker gang disowned them, their overall leader releasing a statement denouncing Frank and his crew for tarnishing the group's name. Back in Maplewood, Elon's focus shifted to the diner and the community. He called Rosie one evening with a proposal. "How would you feel about a little upgrade to the diner?" he asked casually. Rosie hesitated. "Elon, this place is my home. It doesn't need anything fancy." "It's not about fancy," Elon assured her. "It's about making sure this town always has a place where people can feel more connected together, somewhere communal." Over the next month, Rosie's diner underwent subtle but meaningful changes. New booths replaced the worn ones, a fresh coat of paint brightened the walls, and a small plaque was mounted near the entrance, honoring Walter as the heart of their community. Rosie, ever the pragmatist, refused to let Elon pay for everything, but he found ways to contribute, quietly funding the repairs through anonymous donations. For Walter, Elon's efforts extended further. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail, bearing Elon's distinctive signature. Inside was a certificate for unlimited meals at Rosie's, along with a note, "Dear Walter, heroes like you deserve more than thanks. Consider this a small token of appreciation for everything you've given to your town and the world. Yours, Elon." Walter, though deeply moved, didn't let the attention change him. He continued his evening walks to Rosie's, tipping his cap to passers-by and chatting with anyone who crossed his path. The diner had become even more of a gathering place, just as Elon had envisaged. One evening, as Walter sat in his usual booth, a young boy approached him, clutching a notebook. "Mr. Walter," the boy said shyly, "can you tell me about being a hero?" Walter looked at the boy with a kind smile. "Hero, huh? I'm not sure about that, but I can tell you this. Being kind and standing up for others is something anyone can do. That's what makes all the difference." As the boy listened intently, the diner buzzed with warmth and gentle conversations. Rosie wiped her hands on her apron, watching the scene with a satisfied smile. Elon's intervention had done more than bring justice. It had reminded Maplewood of its strength. Back at his Tesla office, Elon received a final update from his team. The bikers were officially out of the picture, and the town was thriving. For Walter and the people of Maplewood, the story wasn't just about a billionaire stepping in or a gang being brought to justice. It was a reminder that even in the smallest corners of the world, kindness, courage, and community could light up the darkest moments. And sometimes, heroes didn't wear capes. What do you think about Musk's bold response? Was it too extreme or perfectly justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.